Tonight, on First at 9 this Thursday, the 27th of February 2025. Parliamentary proceedings. Committee stage debate on Budget 2025 commences. Prime Minister reveals expenses incurred for former President's overseas trips. Digital tax. Concerns raised over new service imports tax, claiming it will disrupt Sri Lanka's digital industry. Digital service providers will receive tax relief through the new framework, says Deputy Minister. Inclusive growth. Sri Lanka continues to experience high poverty levels despite the deflation in the country, highlights expert. Calls for an economic growth plan to address rising poverty. Promising start. Sri Lanka earns over $1.3 billion through exports in January 2025, recording a 10.3% increase from last year.
Chino Dairy, Sri Lankawama Kiren Perata. ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
කට්ට පරිස්සම් කරගත්තොත් අපි පරිස්සම්.
This is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9, brought to you by Sri Lanka's most trusted news source, Derana. I am Tarindu Mahendra, joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. Now, in your top story tonight, the third reading or the committee stage debate of the 2025 budget commenced in Parliament today. Today, 21 expenditure heads, including those of the President, the Prime Minister's Office, Parliament and various commissions were debated. During the debate, Prime Minister Dr. Harini Amadasuriya presented a report on expenses incurred by former presidents during their foreign trips.
I have been in Parliament for 30 years. Usually during the second reading, the winding up speech is delivered by either the Minister of Finance or the Deputy Minister of Finance. However, on this occasion, it was done by the Leader of the House, which goes against the tradition of this House.
Before my winding up speech, both the Deputy Minister of Finance and the Minister of Labour delivered a 40-minute reply speech for the second reading. For the first time in history, we have allocated 2 days for the committee stage debate on the Finance Ministry. This is a historic move. I would like to know whether such an incident has occurred in your 30 years in Parliament.
විශේෂයෙන්ම ජනාධිපතිවරුන්ගේ විදේශ සංචාර පිළිබඳව අපේ රටේ පැවතුණු දේශපාලන සංස්කෘතිය තුළ විදේශ සංචාර අවභාවිතා වෙලා තියෙනවා 2010 සිට 2014 දක්වා කාලය තුළ මහින්ද රාජපක්ෂ ජනාධිපතිවරයා වෙනුවෙන් විදේශ ගමන් සඳහා දරා ඇති වියදම රුපියල් මිලියන 3572යි. 2015 සිට 2019 දක්වා කාලය තුල මෛත්‍රීපාල සිරිසේන ජනාධිපතිවරයා වෙනුවෙන් විදේශ ගමන් සඳහා දරා ඇති වියදම රුපියල් මිලියන 384යි. 2020 සහ 2022 අවුරුදු දෙකක කාලයක් තුල ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ ජනාධිපතිවරයා වෙනුවෙන් විදේශ ගමන් සඳහා දරා ඇති වියදම රුපියල් මිලියන 126යි. ටිකක් අඩුයි සාපේක්ෂව 2023 සහ 2024 දක්වා කාලය තුල රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ ජනාධිපතිවරයා වෙනුවෙන් විදේශ ගමන් සඳහා දරා ඇති වියදම රුපියල් මිලියන 533යි 2024 සැප්තැම්බර් සිට 2025 පෙබරවාරි දක්වා කාලය තුල අනුර කුමාර දිසානායක ජනාධිපතිවරයා අපේ ජනාධිපතිවරයා වෙනුවෙන් විදේශ ගමන් සඳහා දරා ඇති වියදම රුපියල් මිලියන 1.8යි අපිට ජනතාව වෙනුවෙන් වැඩ කළා තියෙන කලමනාකරණය කරමින් මේක කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියන එකත් මෙන්න අපි ක්‍රියාවෙන් පෙන්නලා තියෙනවා.
අපේ ගම්වල මිනිස්සු කිව්වේ අර ඒ කාලේ
The old slogan claimed that Colombo was prioritized while villages were ignored. What I want to understand is how this so-called new liberal democratic economy has benefited innocent villagers. We feel sorry for the common people. Entrepreneurs in the SME sector had hoped for a meaningful program to support their recovery through the entrepreneurial concept, which we proposed but you stole. There is no use in making confusing statements or hiding behind formulas. You gave them high hopes, yet now you have dragged them beneath the ground. This NPP government made promises to the youth of this country, claiming they would provide facilities to help them earn foreign currency through their innovative ideas. But what happened? A secret gazette was issued imposing an income tax of 15%, which was never mentioned before. This government has shattered the dreams of the youth in this country. They are now helpless. I urge this government to present an alternative plan for the youth.
මම ආරාධනා කර සිටිනවා මේ රජයට මේ තාරුණ්‍ය දෙස බලලා විකල්ප යෝජනාවලියක් ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න.
දැන් අද
There are currently 159 MPs in the NPP. If we take the minimum salary of an MP as 200,000 rupees per month and multiply it by 159, it amounts to 31 million rupees per month, a total of 381 million rupees per year and 1.9 billion rupees over 5 years. The NPP MPs themselves have stated that this 1.9 billion rupees was taken using an entire checkbook. This is the same party that came to power claiming they would minimize waste and protect public funds. If they are truly committed to these values, why are they handing over their salaries to the party instead of donating them to schools or religious institutions that are in need?
The Prime Minister, who is the Minister of Education, repeatedly states that 6% of the GDP must be allocated for education. However, as far as I know, only 1% has actually been allocated. This is the real issue. You came into politics, you came to power, and you protested for 6% allocation. But after assuming responsibility, you only allocated 1%. This is what must be questioned. It has been 10 years since the bond scam, and this government claimed they would bring Arjuna Aloysius to justice at the earliest opportunity. Yet nothing has been done.
අර්ජුන මහේන්ද්‍රන් ගත වෙන පළවෙනි අවස්ථාවේම අරගෙන යනවා කිව්වා. තවම ඒ ක්‍රියාවලිය කරගන්න බැරි වුණා.
2019 ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ ජයග්‍රහණයෙන් පස්සේ එක්සත් ජාතික පක්ෂය සම්පූර්ණයෙන් බිමටලා විනාශ වෙලා ඉන්නවා.
Following Gotabaya Rajapaksa's victory in 2019, the UNP suffered a severe loss. However, due to the situation surrounding Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Ranil Wickremesinghe managed to become president. Everyone said he is good, he dresses well and he is a liberal. But I would say he is a fraud and a beggar. Let me explain why. He has 39 presidential advisors. It is reasonable for a president to have advisors, as no one can be expected to know everything. But having 39 advisors suggests that he knows nothing at all. Even beyond these 39 advisors, there are directors and other officials, bringing the total to 67 people. When calculating their expenses, including the vehicles assigned to them, we have had to reclaim these vehicles through the President's Secretariat for auction to return the funds to the Treasury. For example, a Montero Jeep was assigned to Saman Ratnapriya, who is currently leading a strike. Perhaps he is protesting because he is saddened by losing these privileges. Regarding allowances, 7.9 million rupee has been paid to security advisor Sagar Ratnayaka. 4.3 million rupees was paid to Madhuma Bandara as a presidential advisor in just a few months. What I want to highlight is that under the current president, there are only 3 advisors and there are no expenses. If needed, I will table the relevant documents.
උපදේශකරු සංඛ්‍යාව 3 දෙනයි එකතුව වියදම් බිඳුවයි. මම ඔන්න සභාපත කරන්න.
2022 මාර්තු 31 දින සිට 2022 මැයි 15 දින
The investigative committee established to determine the stages of relief for victims of the violent incidents that occurred between March 31st, 2022 and May 15, 2022 has found shocking revelations. As I previously stated, a total of 1.221 billion rupees in compensation have been provided to ministers and MPs. Additionally, for their allies in local government, other officials and friends, another 1.225 billion rupees has been distributed. The document detailing these allocations is quite extensive and I do not have the time to read it in full. However, to highlight a few instances, the mayor of Casbava, Lakshman Pereira, received 69.6 million rupees. The mayor of Moratua, Samanlal Fernando, received 7.344 million rupees. His son, Ramesh Fernando, received 1.883 million rupees. W.M. Jnanavati of the Anuradhapura Shrine received 28 million rupees.
Leader of Sarvajana Balaya, parliamentarian Dilip Jayavira, asserts that the new 15% tax on service exports will negatively impact Sri Lanka's digital industry, which he highlighted as a sector that can be leveraged to bolster the country's foreign reserves. However, Deputy Minister of Economic Development Professor Anil Jayanta claimed that digital service providers have been granted tax relief compared to other professionals by limiting the tax to a maximum of 15%.
The Inland Revenue Amendment Bill, which amends Sri Lanka's income tax collection process, has now been published in a Gazette notification. A newly added subchapter states that effective April 1st, 2025, a tax of up to 15% will be levied on the remittance of foreign exchange income or profits earned by any individuals for services provided outside Sri Lanka through the country's banking system. Accordingly, it is proposed that this tax will apply to individuals earning foreign currency through digital services at the time their income is generated. Meanwhile, a seminar on the service import tax organised by the Aramuna Youth Organisation was held today in Colombo.
මේ මත හදිස්සියේ බද්දක් පැනවීම මගින් ඇත්තටම මේ සඳහා තිබුණු
Imposing this tax suddenly will negatively affect the happiness of those involved in the digital sector. That in turn destroys the liveliness of the sector. If everyone is paying taxes, should those involved in the digital sector pay this tax? That is why I suggested that leveraging the digital industry is the solution to the country's shortage of foreign exchange reserves. Therefore, saying if everyone pays taxes, why shouldn't they is not a valid argument.
හැමෝම බදු ගෙවනවා නම් මේකට බදු ගෙවන්න බැරියයි කියලා. ඉතින් ඒක it's not a valid argument.
Against this backdrop, Deputy Minister of Economic Development Professor Anil Jayant today addressed the matter.
මාසයක ඔබගේ ආදායම රුපියල්
If your monthly income is less than 15,000 rupees, from April you are not subject to any income tax regardless of the source of your income. If you earn more than 150,000 rupees, a 6% tax will be levied on the first slab of 85,000 rupees, 18% on the next slab of 43,000 rupees, and 24, 30 and 36% respectively on the subsequent 43,000 rupees slabs. This will be the case for all sectors except the export of services. Income tax was previously levied on this sector, but from January 1st, 2020, it was made exempt. Now, it will once again be subject to income tax. However, the maximum rate will be 15%. If you provide digital services to a foreign country and earn less than 150,000 rupees a month, you will be exempt from income tax. If your monthly income is 200,000 rupees, a 6% tax will be levied on the second 50,000 rupee, which lies within the first slab of 85,000 rupees. If your income is a million rupees, the first 150,000 rupees will be tax exempt and the second 85,000 will be taxed at 6%. However, the next 41,000 rupees will not be taxed at the ordinary 18%. All additional income exceeding the first 85,000 rupees of taxable income will only be taxed at a maximum of 15%. Citizens who do not earn their income through digital services exports are liable to pay income tax up to 36%, but digital service providers have been granted relief in this regard. Additionally, if a Sri Lankan digital service provider is taxed by the foreign country to which they provide their services, they will receive tax relief in Sri Lanka. For example, if a person earning a million rupees a month pays a 15% tax to the country which they provide their services, they will not be taxed by Sri Lanka. However, if they are taxed at 20% or 30% by a foreign country, there's nothing we can do about that. On the other hand, if they are taxed less than 15% by the foreign country, they will only be liable to pay Sri Lanka the difference between what they pay to the foreign country and what a 15% tax would amount to. Therefore, digital service providers will be paying less in income tax compared to those with other sources of income.
ආදායම් බදු ගෙවන කෙනෙක් අඩු ආදායමක් ගෙවන්නේ.
පිරිපුන් ජීවිතයකට ඔබ සමගින් පෙරට Union Assurance. චන්දුරුසුමේ කාගෙන් බලා බෙස්සිග TV සඳහා සුපිරි ඩීල්.
Don't waste time. Start your degree with pending A-level results this February with our partner universities. Call ACBT on 0117 699 499.
Less sugar, same great taste. From Melbourne.
Visiting Senior Fellow at ODI Global in the United Kingdom and former Director of Research at the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo, Dr. Ganeshan Vignaraja says that despite the deflationary trend, Sri Lanka continues to face considerably high poverty levels that must be addressed. Joining our current affairs program at Hyde Park with Indivara Amuwatta, he emphasised that to tackle poverty, Sri Lanka must focus on an economic growth plan that can leverage the necessary tools to address pressing issues. Commending the President for being pragmatic and continuing to implement essential reforms, Dr. Vignaraja stressed that the IMF program should be utilised to establish prudent macroeconomic stability in the country.
What What, in your view, is the outlook for Sri Lanka this year?
So the outlook this year in Sri Lanka is 5% growth according to what the central bank say. Inflation is now actually in deflation, meaning price rate growth is falling according to the numbers. But poverty remains very stubbornly high. Some 50% of Sri Lankans are said to be deprived by the UNDP's multidimensional poverty index. The World Bank estimates something like a quarter of our population is poor at the level of $3.65 a day, and there's massive out-migration. So these are huge challenges.
Has poverty been significantly impacted since the crisis, and have the numbers increased?
The problem with this is that the household surveys are expensive and only come out infrequently. So what people do is they try to look at samples of population to tell you a story, and the story appears to be that the poverty numbers have remained stubbornly high at somewhere between 25% of the Sri Lankan population to 50%, some big number like that. And there may have been a little bit of trending downwards with growth recovering in the Sri Lankan economy, but there are pockets of poverty. I mean, one big issue is old age poverty, for instance. You know, we are an aging population in Sri Lanka, and more than half our population will be over 60 years old very, very soon. Our welfare support services and agencies don't adequately cover people. There are health issues, and then there is this sad issue for me of child malnutrition. And the sad part is we don't really have the resources to deal with all of this without proper growth. So we're going to have to think of a growth plan for Sri Lanka at the next phase of our development, now that we've stabilized. And that growth plan has to be led by better macroeconomic management and an export or perish mentality for us to move forward, and a strong emphasis on the private sector delivering that story while maintaining pathway for the poor and the MSMEs and so on to come into the mainstream of development.
There's much talk about the budget being a continuation of policies of the previous government. Although the campaign pledges of President Andrew Kumara Dissanayake during campaigning was to either amend the IMF agreement, to not continue certain pledges to the IMF, and also amend certain legislatures that were enacted. Now the opposition suggests that this budget would really run down on the government coffers, to impacting growth trajectory for the country.
I don't think that's quite true, to be honest. I think President deserves credit for being very pragmatic in what he has done, which is a continuity of policy broadly of Gotabaya Rajapaksa once he abandoned the homegrown solutions and went to the IMF, of Ranil Wickremesinghe, who helped bring around the turnaround during his time but didn't reap the political dividend from that. You have this in the budget with really these three important pieces of legislation that are very much still in process, and one encourages government to keep those pieces of legislation in place. So we must use the IMF program as a way of building prudent macroeconomic stability as doing this. The second thing, of course, is the digitization, which I think is terribly important. We have to cut the inefficiency across public services and public service delivery, and also the corruption incentive by digitization. And then this very important story of trying to look at the anti-corruption stuff. I think that's very, very important if we want investors to invest here, both local and foreign. At the same time, we have to look at the technology and skills side of being able to upgrade this economy.
The Attorney General informed the Supreme Court today that 245 million rupees in compensation has been paid to the victims of the Easter Sunday terror attacks, as per the order issued with regard to the fundamental rights petition filed over the failure to take action to prevent the attacks. The notification was made when 12 petitions filed for the observation of the payment of compensation to the victims were taken up before the Supreme Court today. The petitions were taken up before a three-judge bench of the Supreme Court comprising Chief Justice Murdu Fernando, Justice S. Raja and Justice A.H.M.D. Nawaz. The Government Nursing Officers Association today launched a protest in front of all major hospitals across Sri Lanka over purported reductions in nurses' allowances through the 2025 budget. However, the All Ceylon Nurses Union and the Public Services United Nurses Union, two other major nurses associations, did not partake in the protests. Meanwhile, principals and teachers also raised concern regarding issues concerning their salaries.
The Government Nursing Officers Association conducted protests in front of all major government hospitals across the country, including the Colombo National Hospital at 12 p.m. today. The key issues highlighted by the association include the reduction of overtime allowances, reduction of allowances for working on public holidays and weekly off days, and the curtailment of the promotion process proposed by the 2025 budget.
The government has increased salaries, but on the other hand, there is a wide reduction in allowances. Our comrades Lal Kanta, Vasanta Samarasinga and Mahinda Jayasinghe fought for a 20,000 rupee increase in salaries last April when the then government granted a 10,000 rupee hike. Now the economy has improved. Now they have a responsibility to at least grant a 25,000 rupee hike. The government should understand that.
However, the All Ceylon Nurses Union and the Public Services United Nurses Union, two other major nurses associations, did not partake in these protests. The All Ceylon Nurses Union said that the government has provided satisfactory concessions through the new budget. The Public Services United Nurses Union highlighted that the government has yet to appoint committees or publish circulars regarding salaries, but stated that if allowances are reduced, they would take action against it. In a separate development, the Graded Principals Association claimed that teachers have received a higher wage increase than principals. In the meantime, the Ceylon Teachers Union asserted that there is a reduction in the salaries of teachers due to the Subodhini Committee report not being implemented.
Fast track your career from O levels with eSoft.
ඩයිබටිසෝල් සීනිවලින් පරිස්සම් වන ඔබට අමතක නොවන පෝෂණය.
කැලනි වයර් කිසිගින්නක් නෑ.
කිසිගින්නක් නෑ. කැලනි Fire Shield Wire.
Malibu chocolate cream, inguru and lemon puff. Less sugar, same great taste. From Malibu.
Responsibility to look after our health.
The best nutritional supplement for diabetic patients with no added sugar. Maliban Vitagen. Stay healthy for a good reason.
President Anura Dissanayake today met the ambassadors of the Netherlands, Egypt, Italy and Japan to Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, the president also participated in a discussion on national security with high-ranking officials of the Sri Lanka Air Force.
Ambassador of the Netherlands to Sri Lanka, Bonnie Hobak, met President Anura Dissanayake today at the Presidential Secretariat. During the meeting, the ambassador stated that the Dutch government is prepared to engage in port-related investments in Sri Lanka. Discussions were also held on potential assistance from the Dutch government to elevate the Clean Sri Lanka program to a new level. An agreement was reached to receive support from the Dutch government for the conservation of culturally and historically significant creations, research activities at the University of Colombo, as well as educational and training programs for Sri Lankans. President Anura Dissanayake also met Ambassador of Egypt to Sri Lanka, Adel Ibrahim Ahmed Ibrahim today. Discussions focused on addressing issues related to tourism and investment sectors in both countries. The current situation in the Middle East region, along with the new government's Middle East policy, which was praised by the ambassador, was also a key point of attention during the meeting. Meanwhile, President Dissanayake met the Italian ambassador to Sri Lanka, Damiano Francovi. During the discussion, Ambassador Francovi expressed hope for the prompt resolution of existing issues related to the working visa process for Sri Lankans who are expecting to migrate to Italy. The president also met Ambassador of Japan to Sri Lanka, Akio Isomata. The Japanese ambassador stated that efforts have been made to include Sri Lanka in the recently launched Security Cooperation Assistance Program by the government of Japan. Discussions were held regarding the ongoing and future initiatives of the joint Japan-Switzerland-South Africa program aimed at fostering national reconciliation among the northern communities affected by the 30-year conflict. The ambassador also officially invited President Dissanayake to visit Japan. Meanwhile, President Anura Dissanayake participated in a discussion on the current security situation in the country with senior officials of the Sri Lanka Air Force. The meeting focused on future security measures with in-depth discussions on enhancing the Sri Lanka Air Force as a maritime security air force within the Indian Ocean region. The Air Force's support for operations conducted by the Sri Lanka Army and Navy were also extensively deliberated. Additionally, the meeting addressed the budgetary allocations for the Air Force in the latest national budget, as well as the current requirements of the force.
Law enforcement authorities suspect that the shooting, which was carried out yesterday in Minuwangoda, was done in retaliation for the murder of the notorious underworld leader Ganemulla Sanjeeva. In the meantime, a stash of weapons was also found in a cemetery in Mahena-Gampaha, and further investigations are expected to be conducted regarding the weapons.
10 suspects have been arrested so far in connection with the murder of underworld kingpin Ganemulla Sanjeeva, which took place on the 19th of this month at the Halfstop Court complex. However, the female accomplice who aided the suspected shooter by smuggling the murder weapon into the court complex is yet to be arrested. A few days after the murder, a shooting occurred yesterday in the Minuwangoda area, which injured a schoolmate of Kehelbaddara Padme, who is suspected to have orchestrated the murder of Ganemulla Sanjeeva. The victim was immediately admitted to hospital, and it was confirmed that the victim was also involved in drug trafficking. Police suspect that the shooting was carried out as an act of revenge by two close associates of Ganemulla Sanjeeva, who have been identified as Heenatiyana Sanka and Karandeniya Sudda. In the meantime, a close associate of another drug trafficker named Heenatiyana Mahesh was arrested with a locally manufactured revolver by the Western Province North Range Crime Division today in Minuwangoda. Police also discovered a stash of weapons hidden in a cemetery in Mahena Gampaha yesterday. The recovered weapons include a T-56 type firearm, a magazine and 23 rounds of live ammunition. However, it was not revealed who had hidden the weapons, and further investigations regarding the weapons are expected to be carried out under the direction of the Director of the Western Province North Range Crime Division, Assistant Superintendent of Police Rohan Olugala. Meanwhile, the Colombo High Court today ordered the defence of the legal proceedings against 3 defendants, including notorious underworld figure Nadun Chintaka Vikramaratne alias Harakkata, to inform the court of its stance regarding the request to conduct the proceedings via Skype. Nadun Chintaka Vikramaratne alias Harakkata, who was remanded in custody, was not produced before court today due to security concerns. The High Court judge ordered the defence attorneys to present their stance on this matter to the court on the 17th of March.
Welcome back. Now, in business-related news, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka issued a warning against the use of the word finance in the names of businesses. Accordingly, CBSL clarified that the use of the word finance is in contravention of the provisions of Section 10(2) of the Finance Business Act number 42 of 2011, which states that no person other than a finance company or institution specified in Section 10(6) of the Act shall use the terms finance, financing or financial as part of the name or description of the business without prior written approval of the Central Bank. As per Section 56(4) of the Act, any person who contravenes or fails to comply with the said provision is guilty of an offence under the Act. CBSL says that the public is strongly advised to adhere to this legal requirement. Now, Sri Lanka's export earnings for January 2025 were recorded at $1.334 billion, marking a promising start to the year and reflecting a 10.3% increase over the same period in 2024. According to the Export Development Board, merchandise export performance in January 2025 amounted to over $1 billion, representing a 3.51% increase compared to January 2024. The increase in merchandise exports was primarily driven by an increase in earnings from the export of apparel and textiles, tea, coconut-based products, diamonds, gems and jewellery, spices and concentrates, and food and beverages. Meanwhile, services exports for the month of January 2025 were estimated at $329.37 million, reflecting a 37.87% year-on-year increase. Among Sri Lanka's top 15 export markets, the United States, India, the United Kingdom and the European Union all exhibited positive growth during the month. Now, in a stock update, the Colombo Bourse closed in green today as a result of price gains in counters such as Lanka Holdings, LOLC Holdings and Commercial Bank. The all-share price index climbed 0.52%, settling at 16,430.77 points. Meanwhile, the S&P Sri Lanka 20 climbed 0.02%, ending at 4,898.29 points. Market turnover stood at 1.6 billion rupees. The capital goods sector was the top contributor to market turnover, followed by the banking sector. Foreign participation in market activity remained at subdued levels, with foreign investors closing as net sellers, offloading shares worth 204 million rupees. For international news, join us after this short commercial break. And that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining and have a good night.